The summer she turned 9, a girl in Maverick County, Texas, started collecting things from the dry creek bed behind her family's trailer: broken bricks, flattened tin cans, animal bones, old wire, and arranged them in a circle that nobody on the road could explain. Every afternoon, she waded into the creek bed that carried water only 2 or 3 times a year and picked through what the floods had left behind and the road had thrown away. Bricks cracked in half by heat, tin cans pressed flat by tires, cattle bones bleached white by sun, wire fencing rusted to the color of the dirt it lay in. She carried them up the bank in a plastic bucket and arranged them in a ring 6 feet across on the bare ground behind the trailer, stacking them the way a child stacks blocks carefully, with a seriousness that made the adults on the road look twice and then look away. In the center of the ring, she bent a cylinder of wire mesh into a basket and set it upright. She cut a wedge-shaped opening in the ring, a narrow path from the outside to the center, shaped like a keyhole from above. Mrs. Garza, who lived 2 trailers down and grew peppers in a wooden raised bed she watered with a garden hose, watched the girls stack rubble one evening and said what the road was thinking. "That's not a garden, Misha. That's a junkyard." The girl did not explain. When her father asked, she said she was building something. When her mother worried about the weight of the bricks, she said she was almost done. She did not say what it was for. Nobody on that road knew what the circle of rubble was for. When 6 weeks passed without rain and nothing else was growing, the circle answered. If stories of children who build gardens from nothing, deserts that learn to grow, and the kind of imagination that sees a garden in a pile of trash means something to you, subscribe and stay with us. Tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. The Rise family did not own land. They rented a trailer lot on the east side of Eagle Pass, where Maverick County flattens out into thorn scrub and the Rio Grande is close enough to see from the overpass, but not close enough to matter. The lot was a square of hard ground with a trailer on it, and nothing else: no fence, no shade tree, no garden. The dirt was Kate clay, pale and alkaline, cracked in patterns that looked like the skin of something that had stopped drinking. The girl's father worked seasonal jobs on the cattle ranches north of town. Her mother cleaned houses 3 days a week in Eagle Pass proper. They bought vegetables at the grocery store 20 minutes away, where a bell pepper cost what an hour of cleaning paid and a bag of tomatoes cost what 2 hours paid. They were not poor in the way that newspapers describe poverty. They were poor in the way that families are poor when everything works but nothing is left over. The girl's abuela had lived with them until 2 years ago. She was from a village south of Piedras Negras, where water was scarce and gardens were built from whatever the ground provided. She had grown chiles and squash and cilantro in a circle of stacked stones with a compost basket in the center, what she called a jardín de ojo de cerradura, a keyhole garden. The girl remembered fragments her grandmother kneeling inside the circle, the smell of wet earth in a place where wet earth was rare, the green of pepper leaves against brown stone walls. She remembered her grandmother saying something she did not understand at the time. La tierra da si tú la das, the land gives if you give to it. The abuela died in her sleep on a January night when the temperature dropped below freezing and the trailer heater ran out of propane. The jardín was not mentioned at the funeral. Nobody thought to mention it. It was a thing built from rocks in a village that most of the family had left behind, and it did not seem to belong in the same sentence as grief. But the girl remembered, not the technique. She had been 7, and 7-year-olds do not memorize construction methods. She remembered the shape, a circle, stones, green things growing where nothing should grow, and her grandmother's hands in the dirt, giving the land something so it would give back. She carried that memory the way children carry things they do not yet have a use for quietly, without examining it, waiting for the day it would match something real. She found the match at a thrift store in Eagle Pass on a Saturday when her mother stopped to look at kitchen pans. The girl wandered to the book bin, a cardboard box on the floor near the door, where paperbacks and water-stained hardcovers went to wait for someone who would pay 50 cents. The notebook was at the bottom. Cardboard cover, spiral-bound, handwritten in blue ballpoint, no title, no author name, just page after page of drawings and notes in English with measurements in both inches and centimeters. Written by someone who had clearly been building things in a place where building materials did not come from a store. One page stopped her, a circle drawn from above, 6 feet across. Walls made of stacked stones and rubble, a wedge-shaped opening on one side, a keyhole, and in the center, a cylinder made of wire mesh, labeled compost basket. She knew this shape. She had seen it before, not on a page, but in the dirt in a village south of Piedras Negras, built by hands that were no longer alive. The notebook explained what her grandmother had never needed to explain because her grandmother had learned it by doing. The keyhole garden was developed in Lesotho, a small country in southern Africa, where the rainfall is 15 inches a year and the soil is thin, and the people who grow food there do it with whatever they have. Aid workers in the 1990s formalized the design, but the principle was older than any organization. The compost basket in the center receives kitchen scraps and gray water dishwater. Rinse water, any water that has already been used once. The scraps decompose, the nutrients and moisture seep outward through the soil, feeding the plants from the inside. The rubble walls hold heat, warming the soil at night. Sheltering it from hot wind during the day, the raised design lifts the root zone above the baking ground surface, allowing air to circulate beneath. A note at the bottom of the page. Underlined twice, works in Lesotho with 15 inches rain, will work anywhere dry. Maverick County gets less than 18 inches, the girl paid 50 cents. She walked to the car holding the notebook against her chest, the way you hold something that has just confirmed a memory you were not sure was real. That evening, she walked to the creek bed and began collecting bricks. The first wall fell because she built it the way a child builds, straight up. She stacked the bricks and cans in a perfect vertical circle, each layer balanced on the one below. The walls rising 18 inches before she began filling the inside with dirt and compost she had scraped from behind the trailer. It looked solid. It looked like something. Then the first rain came, not a real rain. Just a 15-minute shower that barely darkened the road, and the north side of the wall leaned outward, then collapsed, scattering bricks and tin cans across the lot like a sentence that had lost its punctuation. Her mother stood in the trailer doorway. "Mija, it's falling apart. Maybe this isn't going to work here." The girl sat beside the broken wall for a while. Then she opened the notebook to the cross-section drawing she had looked at so many times. The page was soft at the edges. The walls in the drawing were not vertical. They leaned inward 5 degrees. Maybe 10 each layer, slightly closer to the center than the one below it. The lean made the wall self-bracing. Gravity pushed inward instead of outward. She rebuilt the north side with the bricks angled in. The larger pieces at the base, the cans wedged between like mortar. The next shower held. The second problem was the rats. She built the compost basket from the only wire mesh she could find, a strip of old fencing from the creek bed with gaps wide enough to push a thumb through. She filled it with kitchen scraps, the first week onion skins, pepper stems, rice, eggshells. By the third morning the scraps were gone. Tracks in the soft dirt around the basket, rat tracks. Her father looked at the empty basket and said what he saw. "You're feeding the rats, not the garden." She walked to the abandoned barn at the end of the road, a structure nobody owned and nobody maintained, and found a roll of hardware cloth behind a fallen shelf. Finer mesh, 1/4-inch gaps. She bent a new basket, tighter, smaller openings, and covered the top with a layer of dried leaves that let water through but discouraged digging. The scraps stayed, the rats did not. By April, something was happening inside the circle that was not happening anywhere outside it. The soil nearest the compost basket, the 6 inches closest to the wire mesh, was darker than the soil at the edges. Darker and damp. The kitchen scraps and gray water she poured into the basket each evening were breaking down and seeping outward, carrying moisture and nutrients into the surrounding dirt in a slow, invisible horizontal tide. She planted pepper seedlings in a ring around the basket. Tomato starts along the south wall where the bricks caught the most sun. Squash at the keyhole entrance where the vines could spill outward. The neighbors watched from the road. "You can't grow food in tin cans and broken bricks. That's a junkyard, not a garden. This is the desert, honey. Nothing grows here without a hose." Her abuela tried something like that in Mexico. Didn't work there either. The last sentence reached the girl through her mother, who repeated it not as agreement but as warning. The girl said nothing. She knew it was wrong, not because she had evidence, not yet, but because she had been 7 years old in a village south of Piedras Negras, and she had seen green peppers growing inside a circle of stacked stones in a place where nothing was supposed to grow. Her abuela's garden had worked. The neighbors just had not been there to see it. Summer came the way. Summer comes to Maverick County, not arriving so much as tightening, the heat increasing by a degree each week until the air itself felt like something you had to push through to walk. 6 weeks without rain. That was not unusual for this part of Texas. What was unusual was the duration: 6 full weeks, mid-June through the end of July, without a single drop. The temperature stayed above 105 every afternoon and cracked 110 on 8 of those days. The creek bed behind the trailer turned white. The caliche cracked into hexagons that looked like tiles laid by someone who had given up on grouting. Mrs. Garza's raised bed was the first to fail. She had built it properly, cedar planks. Good potting soil, drip irrigation from a garden hose. She watered twice a day. The water hit the surface of the soil and began evaporating before it reached the roots by the 3rd week. She was running the hose 3 times a day and watching her water bill climb past $75 a month. By the 4th week, her tomatoes were dead. By the 5th, her peppers had curled inward and stopped producing. She stood at her raised bed one evening and said the sentence that every gardener in Maverick County eventually says: "I'm watering the air, not the plants." 2 other families on the road had tried container gardens on their porches. Both abandoned them by July. The containers heated up in the afternoon sun like clay ovens, baking the roots from the outside in. Nothing survived. The girl's keyhole garden sat behind the trailer in the same heat, on the same cracked ground, under the same sun. Every evening she poured the day's gray water into the compost basket dishwater, rinse water, the water her mother used to wash vegetables. Every evening she dropped in kitchen scraps, onion skins, eggshells, rice, pepper stems. The basket received it all and did what baskets do: held it, let it break down, and release the moisture and nutrients sideways into the surrounding soil, through gaps in the wire mesh. The rubble walls did the rest during the day. The bricks and tin cans absorbed heat and shielded the interior from the hot southwest wind that dried everything it touched. At night, when the desert temperature dropped 40 degrees between sunset and dawn, the walls released their stored heat slowly inward, keeping the root zone warm while the exposed ground outside froze the shallow roots of anything trying to grow there. The peppers were red. The tomatoes were coming in pink and firm. The squash vines spilled out through the keyhole and spread across the bare ground outside the circle, their broad leaves shading dirt that had not been shaded in years. Inside the circle, dark soil, damp, alive. Outside the circle, pale, cracked, empty. The border between the two was the rubble wall, tin cans and broken bricks and cattle bones. Stacked by a 9-year-old with a 50-cent notebook and a memory of her grandmother kneeling in the dirt. One morning in late July, Mrs. Garza stood at the edge of her dead raised bed and looked across the lot at the girls' circle. Red peppers and green leaves inside a wall of trash, in the middle of the worst drought of the summer, without a hose, without a bill, without a single thing that cost money. She stood there a long time. The next morning she walked over. She came through the gap between the trailers with her house slippers still on, which meant she had not planned to come. She had just looked out her kitchen window one more time and could not stay on her side of the lot any longer. The girl was inside the keyhole, standing in the wedge-shaped entrance. Pouring gray water from a plastic pitcher into the compost basket, she looked up. She did not speak. Mrs. Garza walked around the outside of the circle first. She ran her hand along the rubble wall, bricks and cans and bones stacked in a curve that leaned slightly inward, warm under her palm from the heat the wall had stored through the night and was only now beginning to release. She stopped at the south side where the bricks caught the most morning sun and looked over the wall at the pepper plants inside. Red fruit hanging from stems that should not have been alive in a county where nothing without a hose had survived the last 6 weeks. She stepped through the keyhole entrance and stood at the center. The compost basket was at her hip, wire mesh, kitchen scraps in various stages of decomposition, watermelon rinds and eggshells and coffee grounds breaking down into something dark and damp. She could see moisture seeping through the mesh into the surrounding soil. She could see worms in July in Maverick County, where the ground outside the circle was cracked dry enough to cut a boot sole. She knelt down and pressed her hand into the soil beside a tomato plant. The dirt was dark, cool, damp. 3 inches down, she looked at her own raised bed across the lot, cedar planks. $75 a month in water, dead peppers, dead tomatoes, a hose coiled on the ground like a rope that had stopped being useful. She stood up and looked at the girl. "Where did you learn to build this?" The girl set the pitcher on the edge of the compost basket. A notebook from Africa. Mrs. Garza looked at the circle one more time. Tin cans she had stepped over in the creek bed. Bricks she had driven past on the road. Bones she had seen bleaching in the sun for years. A wire basket full of the scraps she threw in the trash every evening. All of it here, arranged in a ring by a 9-year-old, growing food without a hose in the worst drought of the summer. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that was not about the garden. "Could you show my granddaughter how to build one?" The girl nodded. In September, the girl and Mrs. Garza's granddaughter built the second keyhole garden together. The granddaughter was 7. She carried bricks from the creek bed in a plastic bucket that was too heavy for her arms and exactly right for her determination. The girl showed her how to lean the walls inward, how to bend the wire mesh, how to cut the keyhole entrance wide enough to stand in. They built it in 2 afternoons using materials that had been lying in the creek bed since before either of them was born. The girl's father built the third. He did not tell anyone he was going to do it. One Sunday morning, he walked to the creek bed, filled a bucket with rubble, and constructed a compost basket from hardware cloth behind the trailer. He set it in a small circle of stacked bricks near the back wall, where the afternoon shade would protect it from the worst of the heat. He filled the basket with scraps. He planted cilantro and chile, what his wife used most. What cost the most at the store, what his mother-in-law had grown in a circle of stones in a village that nobody on this road had ever visited. 3 circles now, 3 green dots visible from the road in a landscape the color of dust. Tin cans and broken bricks and cattle bones, holding water that no hose delivered, growing food that no store sold. Built by a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and a man who had spent his life growing things for other people and had finally grown something for his own family. The abuela had said it plainly. La tierra da si tú la das, the land gives if you give to it. Her granddaughter gave it the only things she had: rubble from a creek bed, scraps from a kitchen, water from a sink, and a notebook that a stranger had written in a country 6,000 miles away, where the rain fell the same amount, and the people had the same amount of nothing, and built the same kind of something from it. She did not have soil, she did not have water, she had a creek bed full of things nobody wanted, and a notebook that showed her what to do with them. What is lying in the creek bed or the junkyard near you that might be a garden waiting to happen? Tell us in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe, and we will see you next week.